Well, hello there. Good afternoon, everybody. How you guys doing? That's what I'm talking about. Thank you, Stash, for that lovely introduction and for your leadership. To Steve, the entire Board of Trustees, and to all of you, thank you for being here. Welcome to DC, my home away from home. We are glad to have you in town. So glad to have you in town. Now, as many of you may know, over 2 decades ago, when there was a skinny kid from the south side of Chicago working away as a community organizer, the very first grant he received was given to him by the Jewish Fund for Justice, now the Ark. Pretty good choice, don't you think? And the reason why, of course, you gave him that grant was because he was committed to bending the arc of justice, bending the arc of the moral universe, in the words of Martin Luther King, towards justice. And that grant was able to help him fight on behalf of people whose voices were often unheard. His goal was to make sure that government was actually for the people and by the people and ensure that their voices were represented in the government. And that has been what has driven him over the last 2 decades and certainly during his last 7.5 years in office as president. So I want to begin by saying thank you. Had it not been for you, maybe he would not be where he is today. And I'm also delighted that you are giving the Andrew Goodman Award to your longtime board chair this evening, Steve Frischman. For those of you who might be a little too young to remember, I am not, I wanted you to just know that Andrew Goodman was an incredible young Jewish advocate who, together with Michael Schwerner and James Chaney, fought for justice, fought for civil rights, and were murdered together at a very young age by the Ku Klux Klan as they fought for civil rights. And the president gave all three the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award you can give to anyone, to demonstrate how important it was that African Americans and Jewish leaders could stand together, could fight and ensure that their voices were heard, to ensure that every American has the opportunity to live up to that promise that all Americans deserve. They were an inspiration to us, and so I'm just delighted to be able to offer my congratulations to Steve. When President Obama gave a commencement speech at Howard University a few weeks ago, he spoke of African Americans' quote, particular awareness of injustice and unfairness and struggle. That very same is, of course, true of very many members of the Jewish American community, from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel to Andrew Goodman, countless Jewish Americans who fought for civil rights throughout our nation's history, determined to know what we all know, which is that each person has the opportunity to bend that arc. And individually and collectively, that's how we have grown our union to be the union that it is today. From Deuteronomy's teaching, justice, justice shall you pursue, to this week's summit, amply titled Pursuing Justice, the Jewish community has long internalized the importance of and the practice of a dedication to justice, to the stranger, to the idea that we are all intertwined, linked. For these values are ingrained in the Torah's teaching and have also been reinforced through life's experiences. Dr. King also observed in his letter from the Birmingham jail back in 1963, I still remember that, maybe many of you do as well, and it rings true today. He said, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what's happening in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are all caught in an inextricable network of mutuality, tied together in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all directly. Those words are just as true today. Aren't they beautiful? Love that quote. So although we have come a long way since 1963, we still have a lot of hard work left to do to continue to bend that long arc of the moral universe. And as you all know, one of President Obama's top priorities is criminal justice reform. It is in need of reform. And I always start my conversation about criminal justice reform by telling a story, because I think it's through the stories that we understand the inhumanity of our current system. A few months ago, the president invited into the White House several people whose sentences had been commuted, some by him, 3 by him, some by President Bush, and by President Clinton. And one of those men was a gentleman I will never forget named Norman. And when I met Norman, he told the story of the day he found out his life sentence for a nonviolent drug offense had been commuted. Life sentence. And he talked about just the sheer emotion of the roller coaster, not knowing why he had been called to the warden's office, knowing that he had petitioned time and time again, not having any idea whether he was being called to be told that yet another of his family members had passed away while he was in prison. He lost his mother, his father, and a sister, and he was wondering who else he had lost. So you can imagine his excitement. But then he had to figure out, now what? What do you do emotionally to prepare yourself to be released from prison when you thought you had a life sentence? And his story was similar to the many other stories we heard that day and that I've heard over the course of the years of people whose not only had their lives been devastated, but their children, their parents, their brothers or sisters, their loved ones. And so the impact of our current system doesn't just take a human toll on the individual, but on their families and our society as a whole. So that's why the president is calling for reform in the 3 C's. First, the community. What can we do to make sure every child gets that fair shot? From early childhood education to breaking the school-to-prison pipeline, breaking the sexual assault to prison pipeline for so many of our young girls, particularly girls of color. What are we going to do in the cell block? What are we going to do to make sure that when people are incarcerated, they have the tools and the help that they need to be able to exit prison ready for re-entering society, to be law-abiding, responsible citizens who can take care of our families? And what are we going to do to make sure that we are reforming the courtroom so that we are no longer sending people to sentences that don't fit the crime? Life sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, for example. And so the legislation that is now, right this minute, being considered in both the House and the Senate, and it's one of the few areas that I can tell you in the last 7.5 years where I have seen bipartisan support. People on both sides of the aisle, across the political spectrum, faith leaders, law enforcement, business leaders, advocates, people who've been incarcerated, their children, their families, members of society that recognize the toll our current system is taking. We spend $80 billion a year on criminal justice. $80 billion. Imagine what we could do with those resources. 2.2 million people are incarcerated. 600,000 are released each year. The number of women who are incarcerated has gone up by 400% in the last 30 years. It is unsustainable. And we have to really ask ourselves, do we have the political will to insist upon change? And so the legislation that we are currently considering would reduce sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. It would put resources back into our system to ensure that people who are incarcerated are receiving what they need in order to re-enter. And it would invest in our young people to make sure that juveniles are not left with mistakes that they've made when they were far too young to be held accountable for the rest of their life. If we honestly believe we are a country that believes in redemption, that we have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So I think about Norman really much more carefully than I think about those dreadful, dreadful statistics. And I say, do we really have the ability right now to make the difference? And I think we can. And so we ask for you to understand what's currently being considered and make sure that you are speaking out and educating the public about what's at stake here. 1 in 3 adults, working age adults, have had some sort of interaction with the criminal justice system. This is not somebody else's problem over here. It is a problem for everyone. And again, remember that inextricable link. So we are determined that in the next month even, we want to see if we can get the House to pass a bill. It's passing multiple bills. The Senate Judiciary Committee has already done hard work, and so has the House, and we really have potential. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which I know you spent some time on this morning, is we have got to talk about the Supreme Court. Now, I wish I could say that I was surprised the evening that Justice Scalia passed away when Senator McConnell said that no matter who President Obama selected, sight unseen, he would oppose even granting the person a hearing. Now, you all know we have a little thing called the Constitution. It's very clear that the president's job in the event of a vacancy is to nominate someone who he thinks is qualified. Well, the president did an inclusive search, and he determined that Judge Garland is more qualified than any nominee who has ever been nominated to the Supreme Court in the history of nominations to the Supreme Court. 19 years serving on the second highest court of the land, the D.C. Circuit. 3 years as chair of that circuit. Outstanding, impeccable reputation for intellectual rigor, discipline, intellectual honesty, and awareness that the Constitution touches the lives of human beings. It is not something that you just look at in isolation. He understands the impact that it has on the lives of our citizens. He has a reputation for consensus building. That's what he's good at. And on the Supreme Court, you want the 9 justices to actually be able to talk and listen to one another, make compelling arguments, change each other's minds, figure out what is best for the highest court of the land to do. That's what Judge Garland has done his entire career. That's what President Obama believes that he could do on the Supreme Court of the United States. So if you want to talk about precedent, let's look at the entire time in which appointments have been made to the Supreme Court. The last time we had a judge who was confirmed in an election year was when President Reagan nominated then Judge Kennedy. I would point out to you that Judge Kennedy received a hearing. He was confirmed 93-0. Now Vice President Biden, then Chairman of the Judiciary Committee Biden, oversaw the hearing. Judge McConnell voted in favor. And so the question I ask you, if that was okay in an election year, what's different now? When a president is nominated for a 4-year term, he is supposed to fulfill his responsibilities during that 4-year term. He's not supposed to say, well, I still have 6+ months left, so I just think I'll sit here and let the world go by. He's supposed to do his job, and you know what? So is the Senate. Now, I am heartened to see that since the time that Senator McConnell said that there would be no hearing, several of his colleagues in the Senate have decided, well, maybe they would meet with Judge Garland. And they weren't perfunctory meetings. They've had hour and a half long meetings. They've listened to him. Many have said after those meetings, well, you know what, he is quite qualified for the job, and have said maybe he should have a hearing. And our question is, if you'll meet behind closed doors and ask questions of Judge Garland, what are you afraid of? Why wouldn't you have a hearing and ask those same questions or any other questions you might have in front of all of you, the American people? Let you make a decision as to whether or not you think he's qualified, and then vote. Vote up or down. Their choice. We're simply saying that President Obama believes he's deserving of confirmation. It's up to the Senate to decide, but it's up to the American people had to have an opportunity to listen to how Judge Garland answers those questions put to him in open session. Why would we deny him that opportunity? I ask you. Why? Well, we shouldn't. That's right. That's right. We absolutely should not. So, we've come a long way over the last 7.5 years. Privilege of a lifetime to be able to serve our country from the White House for a president who I've known for now 25 years. To have a chance to work with so many of you and Americans all across our country to perfect that union. But our work is not done. Our work is never done. And as we know that if we ever decide our union is perfect, somebody else is going to clean our clock by doing better. We cannot rest on our laurels. There are still too many people in our country who are not getting that fair chance they deserve. And that's not something that the president no matter who the president is, can do alone. That's something that he can only do with all of you. So I thank you for being here. You took time away from your jobs to come here and be with us here today. I thank you for that. I thank you for your commitment to our country. I thank you for helping perfect our union. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.